Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of Business Management 325 International Management. So, today we're going to start getting deep into trade, which is often called the meat and potatoes of international business. And we'll start by looking at the theory, which is, in my opinion, one of the strongest of any business and economic theories that are out there in any of your classes and has withstood the test of time. And then we'll talk about ways in which governments and firms sort of mess with this theory of free trade and how they try to stack the field to their advantages. And both of those, I think, are very critical topics. So, first off, a few overall announcements. Wonderful job on the first week of the current events. As you noticed this morning, I highlighted 4 of what we thought are some of the best examples of current events, and we'll do that every week. But everyone did a wonderful job. So remember, you're responsible to write 2 per week, with the exception of the week that you are presenting, not the week before. And then to reply to at least 1 per week, including your presentation week, so you stay in the flow of that. But there's nothing wrong with posting extra, and that will be taken into consideration. So with the groups, thank you for responding to my other call this morning. It looks like, according to my records, there's still 3 spots left in the final group. So if you're not in, as I said, please get in by tomorrow if you don't want to receive late points. So now let's talk a little bit about trade. As I said, there's the trade theory, which goes back sort of deep in time. You could see trade as being the origins of business and even human language, but really sort of codified by Adam Smith, right? Who's often, credited with being the great prophet of capitalism, but he was also a great prophet of trade, talking about absolute advantage. And this is where one nation has an absolute ability to beat another nation in the production of a good, generally over the long term. So an example of that would be the US has an absolute advantage over China in overall agriculture simply because we have more arable land. And China has an absolute advantage over the US in mountain climbing simply because they have more mountains that you can't grow stuff on. That's one of my favorite examples. But what Ricardo did in the 19th century, sort of the height of British power, was he came up with a theory of comparative advantage, which says even if the other guy, and take a huge nation like China versus Cambodia or the U.S. versus Costa Rica, is sort of dominant on almost all fronts simply because of size, it still makes sense to compete because you're going to be relatively better at some things. So I like to give the example of I'm much better at doing global business courses than I am at teaching basketball, a sport which I have absolutely no talent at. So even if somebody is better than me at both, I should still focus on global business. And that, if you read the book, and some of you probably encountered this before, it all adds up. But the problem is that actors can intervene in this logic, which I think works basically if there's no intervention. And governments are the main actors, but also companies behind governments through lobbying and other efforts. And there's a whole variety of ways, which I think some are good and some are bad, in which governments can intervene in this. Tariffs being the most obvious example, but far more sophisticated and less obvious and more subtle means. In my own research, I look a lot at what policies can be acted to drive long-term, high-tech, sustainable, and desirable economic clusters in smaller cities. And in my view, it requires a coordination between industry and government in order to achieve these results. And in some ways, you could say that that's interference in free trade, but it works. The question is what you're doing going to be better than someone else? One of the problems with these strategies is you get what's called in game theory tit for tat. And this is sort of your little, your older brother or sister punches you in the car, and then you punch them back, and then it escalates, and you start screaming, and no one wins, and eventually mom and dad kick in, and the younger brother or younger sister always ends up winning. So there's not really much point in it, and that's what happens with a lot of trade interventions. So some of the big examples are, of course, the US China relationship as the two major traders in the world, which has been very sort of friction laden. We've talked a bit about that already, but more than just that. Before China, the US had most of its trade friction with Japan, and some of that still lingers. Japan has been very happy for the past 20 years or so to be out of the spotlight. But there's still a lot there. There's still things with the EU that are unresolved over steel and some developed industries. And then, of course, under the Trump administration, the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, was superseded by the US Mexico Canada Agreement, which is still in its finalization. It's sort of a slight modernization of NAFTA that looks at these trading blocks. Some other things to watch, though, are particularly in the developing markets where many of them are members of the World Trade Organization, which is the largest agreement on trade. It basically comes up with the same tariffs for everyone and same trade rules. But there's still agreements that can go on top of that. And the US, China, the EU, and everyone else are sort of also vying for influence to see who can give the better deal in places like Africa and India and Southeast Asia and Latin America, right? There's still a lot of room, especially for partners who haven't historically been big trading partners. China with most of Latin America. I gave a talk to the Great Decisions for the Foreign Policy Association on this earlier in the year, or the U.S. and India, who have historically not had much trade. So there's still a lot of room for growth. And then finally, I'll add that the Biden administration is, of course, coming in saying that he would like to change some of the policies that were enacted under the Trump administration, which were in some ways a carryover of the Obama administration and Bush administration, and so on into history. So there's still, I think, a lot of flux in trade and what's going to happen. So we may or may not see something over the next few weeks, or even this week. Keep your eyes peeled to the news and try to come up with a trade-related current event. There's plenty of stuff out there because there's many trade relationships. So I look forward to your work and have a great week.